We hear the word rights all the time, right? The right to speak, the right to vote, human rights, it's everywhere. But have you ever stopped to think, what is a right, really? And more importantly, where do they even come from? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dig into.
So let's get right to it. Where do your rights really come from? Is it something a government just decides to give you? Are they something you're just born with? Or is the answer a little more complicated than that? This is the core question we're going to try and unpack together.
Okay, so before we can figure out where they come from, we have to be on the same page about what they even are. So let's start with the absolute fundamentals.
Now, a right isn't just something you want. It's what's called a justified claim. That's a fancy way of saying it's something that society as a whole agrees is absolutely essential for a person to live with dignity. But here's the crucial part. It has to be guaranteed by the state. Without that guarantee, a right is just a nice idea. The law is what gives it teeth, you know? It's all about finding that sweet spot between your individual freedom and our shared social order.
It turns out you can think of all genuine rights as having a kind of shared DNA. There are these 4 core principles, and if a claim doesn't check all 4 of these boxes, well, it's probably not a fundamental right.
So first, rights are inherent. That means you have them simply because you're human. You don't have to earn them. Second, they're universal. It doesn't matter who you are, where you live, or what your passport says, they apply to everyone. Third, they're inalienable. This is a big one. It means they can't be taken away from you, and you can't sell them or give them up. And finally, they're indivisible and interdependent. The Jenga tower analogy is perfect here. Imagine pulling out one block, say the right to education. Suddenly, other rights like the right to vote intelligently or get a good job start to get pretty wobbly. They all depend on each other.
Okay, so we've got the 4 rules that make a right a right. Now, let's get a bit more practical and look at the different flavors of rights that show up in our everyday lives.
We can basically group them into 5 big buckets, and together, these cover pretty much every part of our lives, from our personal safety all the way to our cultural identity. Let's break them down.
On one hand, you've got civil and political rights. Here's a simple way to think about it. Civil rights are your shield. They protect you from government interference, think the right to a fair trial. Political rights, on the other hand, are your voice. They empower you to participate in how you're governed, like the right to vote or freedom of speech. One is a shield, the other is a voice.
Then you've got the other side of the coin, economic, social, and cultural rights. These are all about making sure everyone has what they need to actually thrive, not just survive. This shows that rights aren't just about being left alone. They're also about guaranteeing access to the essentials for a good life, like education, healthcare, and the ability to find work.
And now we get to the big one. We know what rights are, we know the different types, but this brings us all the way back to our original question. Where do they come from? And let me tell you, this has been a fierce intellectual debate for centuries.
In one corner, you've got the natural rights theorists, like John Locke. They argue that rights are just natural. They exist even before governments do. You're just born with them. But in the other corner, you have the legal positivists, like Jeremy Bentham. They say a so-called right is completely meaningless unless it's written down in a law and enforced by a state. So, which is it? Do rights come from nature, or do they come from law?
And the positivists did not pull their punches. Bentham famously dismissed the whole idea of natural rights as, get this, nonsense upon stilts. Wow. I mean, that's not just a disagreement, that's a brutal takedown. To him, an unenforceable natural right was nothing more than a poetic fantasy.
And the debate doesn't stop there. The liberal theory is all about protecting individual freedom from the state. But the Marxist critique comes in and flips that, arguing that economic equality has to come before any of those other rights can be meaningful. Then the utilitarian view asks a totally different question. Does a right create the greatest good for the greatest number? Which of course raises some pretty tricky questions about how you protect minorities.
And this conversation is far from over. More recent theories, like feminist and critical theories, challenge the very foundation of the old debates. They ask, wait a minute, whose rights were you all talking about? They point out that for centuries, these grand frameworks often completely ignored the struggles of women and racial minorities. Other theories suggest we look beyond just the individual versus the state, arguing that our rights also come from the communities we belong to.
So after all these different theories and these intense debates, what's the big takeaway? Why does any of this philosophical argument from centuries ago still matter to us today?
Well, the key thing to remember is this. The story of rights is not over. It isn't some fact written in a history book. It is a live, ongoing negotiation. Our understanding of what a right is and who deserves it is constantly being shaped by new challenges and social changes. Think about it. Many things we consider fundamental rights today were totally unthinkable a century ago.
And that leads us to a final, thought-provoking question for you. In our age of artificial intelligence, climate change, and increasingly digital lives, what new claims will society decide are essential for a dignified life? What do you think the next fundamental human right will be? Thanks for watching.